Chiptune, the music of video games. You know, you hear this stuff, this bubbly music, and you think, while it may be musically sophisticated, surely it can't be that hard to make it, technically. You know, it's video game music, right? I'm sure there's some intuitive, fun interface. It's real simple. Plug a keyboard in and wail away. You know, look these up, see what they look like. I'm sure it's nothing too crazy. What? Oh, come on! Yeah, I had to go through a huge learning process with this stuff. You know, I grew up playing classical piano. I made electronic music when I was a teenager. I even went to school to be an audio engineer, which I did for like 10 or 15 years. But then fast forward all the way to today, or in the recent time, and I had to kind of go back in time to learn how to make music for these nostalgic game consoles from the 80s and 90s. So it's been a weird journey. I recently made the soundtrack for ZPF, a new game for the Sega Genesis and Mega Drive. While I'd made chiptune once before, it was for the context of Nintendo, the NES. So I had almost no awareness and familiarity with the Sega Genesis sound chip, its capabilities, how to make music for it, anything. Going from that, being a doofus in this context, to having a finished soundtrack with almost 40 songs on it was quite a journey. So this video will be some structured ramblings about memories that stuck with me through this process, things I learned along the way, things I find neat. So this isn't going to be a from the ground up how to make a game soundtrack video. It's just things that stuck with me, the experience of going through this. Now, before ZPF, the first chiptune project I worked on was for this thing called Cavity Destroyer. It was with Greiser from ZPF and Super XYX and everything else. He's been a lifelong friend of mine, and my brother is a dentist, and he also loves games. We grew up playing Contra together and all kinds of things. And he wanted to make a commercial that tied in with his love of games. And so Greiser and I came up with this insane idea to basically make a little Contra-esque game called Cavity Destroyer, where he's a dentist running around shooting cavities and stuff like that. And because of our skill set, it was actually easier for us to just make the game and record the gameplay instead of fake it and animate it somehow, right? And so when I was going to make the music for that, I wanted it to sound awesome. And I had never dealt with a tracker, the type of software you use to make chiptune. I'd never done that before. And so I thought in that case I could maybe fake it using... You can get tools like Chip Sounds, VST, and things like that, which are amazing in their own right. They're tools that really closely emulate the sounds from chiptune music and game consoles sound chips, right? But as I was making music that way, using kind of an emulation of it, a fake method, I just couldn't get it to sound right. Just some magic was missing from it. And so that was one of the first big lessons of when you're making this kind of music, you really have to do it the legit way. You have to do it the hard way. Because the restrictions it places on you at first seem really painful, because you're like, I can only have like 3 or 4 sounds playing at the same time, 3 or 4 notes playing at the same time. You can't have things strumming whole chords of notes. It's just 2 or 3 or 4 little basic sounds that can be plinking along. So at first you're like, oh my God, how do I make something that sounds rich and full? But the same way that a blank wall that's completely empty, that is a lot more terrifying and like less inspiring than a page. You know, if you have a blank page, at least then there's some boundaries for you to bounce off and fight against. it gives you some framework to work within, and that itself turns out to be inspiring. Once you get over the initial discomfort of it, all of a sudden you're like, man, so how do I make this sound good with very limited power, with very limited tools at my disposal? That's the crux of why making chiptune is great. Under really stringent circumstances, it forces you to make a lot with a little. It forces you to focus on the important stuff like the melody and the things that are earworms that just sound great. It makes you focus on the core aspects of the music. With modern tools, you can get lost in a billion different sounds and crazy instruments that you can make up that, sound like anything you could imagine. You can have 2,500 tracks of instruments. You could record your voice and layer it 50,000 times, But in so many options, you can kind of get lost in the sauce. So that early process of making the music based on the Nintendo sound chip and Famitracker, that really primed me for ZPF. It taught me those essentials of how to make a lot with a little. Then go forward a couple years, and this thing ZPF came up. Greiser came to me and was like, hey, I got this cool shooter game I'm working on. You want to do the music for it? I was like, instantly, yes. He's like, but, it's for the Sega Genesis, so it would literally have to be done the proper way with the music that can be functionally used on a playable game cartridge. So I was like, okay, let me research what that's like. I grew up in kind of a Nintendo household, and our parents limited the amount of insane time we would waste gaming or whatever as kids. So we had a Nintendo, Super Nintendo. We couldn't have both. We didn't have a Genesis. So I missed out on all the amazingness that is the Genesis library. So I wasn't that familiar with the sounds or how I'd go about it. But it worked out really. It was just such a serendipitous situation because I looked up the tool to do it. Deaflmask is one of the trackers that you can use to make music for the Sega Genesis Mega Drive sound chip. But then as far as creatively, where did I get started? Greiser told me about the different worlds that would be in this game. It's kind of a futuristic, a fantasy, an alien setting, these very distinct worlds. And so he figured the music would be distinct for each area. And so that played perfectly with my eclectic music tastes and my background, like I said, like I grew up playing classical piano, but also jazz and like ragtime piano stuff. And then I got into weird experimental electronic music when I was a teenager. So that mixture of styles worked perfectly for me. So in the beginning, I think I just had images, maybe some GIFs of gameplay from different areas. I didn't have a lot to go on, but still, his art style is so striking. It's pretty inspiring based on even a little bit. So I took those images, kept them in mind, went into Deaflmask, started learning the different types of sounds this thing's capable of, which turns out to be huge, this massive palette I was not expecting. And as I learned my ropes with how to make the music on that console, I just tried to keep the vibe and the theme of the stage in mind to make something that fit. When I was going into working with the Sega Genesis, it was like my main impression of Sega sounds was FM synthesis. Don't want to get into super technical stuff, but it's the way that it makes sounds. And it was kind of notorious for being super bright and bristlingly, like really super bright, and kind of tinny and piercing sounding. And so I thought erroneously, ignorantly, I thought at first, okay, so I guess that's what the sound chip is like, but I couldn't have been more wrong about that. It turns out it can basically do anything. It can do, bone-rattling bass, pure bass drop stuff. It can do, crazy textured, distorted noises. It can do piercing leads. It also amazingly has the ability to pan things left or right. That was mind-blowing. Like, that's something you have in modern music production software. But in terms of chiptune, you're usually, everything is all in the middle. So it's a very narrow stereo image of the music. There's not a lot of wideness, right? But with the Genesis, it introduced the option to pan things to one speaker or the other. That was insane. Doesn't sound like a lot, but you would be amazed how much that opens up the possibilities and lets you get cinematic with things, lets you give a feel of, like if a drummer's playing drums and they like roll down the tom drums. If you were listening to a modern recording of that, it would actually pan from left to right or right to left a little bit across the speakers, because that's a drum set is mic'd in stereo. You could actually kind of emulate that feeling where things whip around like that. So that was just insane. I was like, oh my God, I could pan things. This is incredible. But yeah, as I presented songs, I just was so lucky to work with such open-minded friends, Greiser and Mikhail Tillander. I'm always butchering his name, probably, I'm sorry. But I don't think there was a single time that they were like, nah, man, make it more like this other game. Can't you just make it more like famous game soundtracks or whatever? I would sense stuff that was really different, like stylistically pretty out there from track to track. And it was always just super supportive. And then even a step beyond that. And I'm just so lucky I got to work on something like this, because not only were they cool with that amount of variety and weirdness and just my own personal flavor of stuff, but sometimes whatever the idea was I would present would kick off this like friendly one-upsmanship where like it would inspire him, Greiser, to go. It would maybe give him an idea about the visuals and the atmosphere of a stage, or how to rearrange things to kind of capitalize on the energy of it better. And he would send that to me, and he would have upped the ante and made something that was super cool atmosphere to it, and that would re-inspire me to make the song even better, or come up with a new weird section in it that would kind of match where you're going from a city area into a sewer or something, underground pipes. So it started this iterative inspiration kicking back and forth that was a symbiotic type of thing. It's a little cheesy to say that, but it really was. So that's a dream. Like open-minded collaborators who give you a lot of autonomy and room to breathe and do your own thing, but then you also kick off inspiration back and forth. I mean, that's as good as it gets. So incredible. As far as inspirations for the sound and everything, again, largely it's kind of internal, just our own eclectic, my own eclectic musical background. There were a few tone references that Greiser gave me up front, like Thunder Force 4, Lords of Thunder. Thunder seems to be a theme there. Those were kind of like the super high watermarks, of Genesis musical quality that you're going to reach for, but you pretty much know you're never going to hit. But again, that's where the freedom and flexibility of this being a project more about uniqueness and just making something that fit the vibe of each stage and making it as cool and weird as possible. And that's a great thing, because man, those composers back then were operating at a really high level. They made stuff that's just such incredibly well-written music. It's truly like if you translated it to an orchestra or symphony for a music score, it could sound incredible, like right off the bat. It's not anything that would have to go through a lot of updating. The music would translate that well. The melodies are all super earworm. You instantly remember them. There's a great spirit to them. It's just incredible songwriting, right? So that can be pretty intimidating trying to, like, if you start to compare yourself to that stuff, that can be a tough spot to get in. Because, you know, it's better to try to do your own thing. You can be inspired by the greats like that, but, you know, don't chase after it like that, because you're not going to get there anyways. But again, luckily in this situation, there was a lot of flexibility, where this is a project that was really more just about uniqueness. So as far as those inspirations, I looked at those mostly as like, oh my God, how are they making those sounds? You know, there's a lot of tricks, which that could be its own deep dive, you know, another video about stuff like that. But the way they made crazy, huge, distorted guitar noises, and the drums sounded so piercing and bombastic. It's more like I tried to learn technically from them as opposed to comparing my songwriting to it, because that would be a recipe for a lot of insecurity. So luckily, again, the situation here was very naturally uplifting, helped me believe in myself and what I was writing. One thing I did have to watch out for long term over the course of the project is avoiding perfectionism. That's always an issue. You know, when you're trying to make something that's really good, it takes a lot of polishing and tweaking and chipping away at something. But there is a point where you have to be okay with however good and how much it sucks, and like be able to live with it. You could hypothetically keep chipping away at something forever, or until it's nothing but dust and you've broken it apart. You know, but you could keep fiddling with something infinitely. So particularly with a project like this, or with game projects that take, you know, a couple years, that can be long enough that if you're like me, where you were kind of learning the ropes of the system and the capabilities as you were going, later in the process, you might be tinkering with a side project or something, and you go to make some music for something else, and you're like, whoa, my tools are a lot sharper now. I could do a lot more. I know all these tricks. I've got a bigger set of ideas to pull from. But then when I would go back to ZPF, I might be like, man, a few songs sounds kind of basic now. Maybe I could beef them up, you know, level them up with my current skill set. But, you know, if you update one song, it makes the other songs around it seem lacking. You're like, maybe I need to update these too. And maybe then the other ones, and then the other ones, and then 6 months down the line, you get more skills. You could start that process over to where you've just kind of evolved and mutated it to where it doesn't have any of its original spirit left. So I found if I was polishing and fiddling with something to the point that it was holding up, bottlenecking production in any way or progress, where I'm like, wait, hold on, don't move forward until I keep tinkering with this, that was a good red flag of like, okay, I just need to let go and be happy with where this is at. So that was an important lesson, you know, learning when to let go. It's good to let go and be happy with where something is now. You can get better on the next thing. You don't have to make this one project the most amazing, perfect thing ever, because if you do that, you'll never finish it. Towards the end of the project, I had dozens of tracks that were at varying 90 to 99% done status, right? And that perfectionism thing could creep in of wanting to, I want to make this better, I want to make this, you know, give it a different section, this could use that. But again, you could do that forever. So that's when having a friend, someone to give you objective input, can be a game changer. For me, that was Alex, aka Tenokoe. He is a very talented musician and composer of chiptune music in his own right. He just worked on the music with Demons of Asaborg DX recently. He's amazing. He was also a good friend. He was able to help me so much at the end of this project, where I was able to bounce things off him and say, here's what I'd like to do, is this laundry list of stuff I'd like to do for this song. And he would help me decide, okay, sure, yeah, maybe you could use a little bit of creative boost in this part of the song. Or he could say, no, man, it sounds good to me. Like, it sounds done. That doesn't sound like a lot, but when you multiply the amount of decisions, creative and practical, across so many songs, and you're trying to balance all that, it can be really difficult. So having a buddy who can just say, give you objective advice, and you trust their taste about music, man, that was a lifesaver. So yeah, thank you, Alex. I owe you one. This has just been an incredible project to work on. You know, it's been fulfilling. It's been challenging in all the right ways. It's made me a better creative. It's opened up friendships and deepened friendships. It's been mind-blowing to see the kind of support we've gotten from backers on the Kickstarter. Thank you. My God. It's just been, I just feel very lucky to have worked on something this inspiring, stimulating, fun. And I'm so happy to see it coming to fruition. So I may do more videos about the music, getting more granular if anyone's interested in that, about, you know, the nerdy, tweaky parts of making this kind of music. But for now, I think I'd just like to bask in the awesomeness of ZPF finally coming to life with your help, everybody's help. So thank you. Thank you for watching. Thank you for coming on this journey with us.